the important thing to highlight here isn't simply the loan opportunity of up to 150 grand, right? It's what the money can unlock. Imagine you've got a $300,000 redevelopment project. The senior lender might be perfectly comfortable financing most of it, but you're short about $75,000 in liquidity. That $75,000 gap can kill the entire project. So sometimes a relatively small amount of flexible capital can unlock a much larger amount of investment. That's called leverage. Not leverage simply meaning debt. I'm talking about catalytic leverage. $1 makes another $4 or $5 possible. And that's why intelligently designed development funds can have impacts far beyond the amounts of money they initially deploy. If $150,000 allows a developer to activate a $500,000 project, you're not simply financing $150,000 worth of development. You're helping unlock $500,000 worth of activity. Let's imagine you purchase a property from the Detroit Land Bank for $1,000 and you believe that after renovation, it could be worth as high as 180 grand. The renovation is going to cost you about $100,000. And on paper, that sounds like a pretty good real estate deal, right? There's just one problem. The lender tells you, we'll finance the construction, but you have to spend the money first. Think about that for a second. You need the financing because you don't even have 100 grand sitting around in the first place. But in order to access the financing, you need enough money sitting around to even start the construction. Welcome to one of the strangest realities of real estate development. And it's a reality that helps explain why the city of Detroit can have thousands of vacant houses, developers willing to renovate them, families looking for housing, banks willing to lend, city governments desperate for investment, and somehow still struggle to get these buildings renovated. Because sometimes the biggest obstacle isn't the real estate, it's the financial plumbing behind the real estate. And this story out of Detroit gives us a perfect opportunity to talk about it. Today's story caught my attention because it's highlighting a challenge that I've personally dealt with throughout my career as an investor/developer: access to capital. Not simply whether financing exists. That's an important distinction because there's a huge difference between somebody saying, congratulations, we approved your $100,000 construction loan, and actually having $100,000 available to pay your contractors. Those are not necessarily the same thing. Today's story is about Black Leaders Detroit creating a fund designed to help developers renovate vacant properties across the city of Detroit. But underneath this story is a much bigger conversation. What happens to neighborhoods when capable small developers can't get through that financial maze? Because once you understand that, you start looking at vacant buildings a little bit differently. Let's check it out.
I'm Demetria Sanders, your community reporter on Detroit's West Side. Through Black Leaders Detroit's Building Fund, old eyesores are being transformed into places that families can once again call home, and it's happening by knocking down barriers for those behind the projects.
It was already a 3-bedroom, 1 bath.
After 20 years in the auto industry as an engineer, Metro Detroiter Keith Buford began looking for a new path in real estate.
Part of what I started doing was flipping properties, just taking ugly houses and making them nice houses because I like nice things and I think the people in this community like nice things.
Since 2021, Buford has renovated 21 residential properties in Detroit, but says it hasn't come without challenges, especially when it comes to working with lenders.
You have to have money to do work first and then you get reimbursed. So not only do you have to come to the closing table with a lot of money, you end up having to save some money just to be able to start the project.
First off, shout out to Keith. 21 properties over the last 5 years. That's extremely impressive and very hard to do in a market such as the city of Detroit. When we're talking about developing, investing here in the city, it's more of an advanced level setting for a number of reasons, right? Financing being just one of many challenges. And so for him to have that level of success within a 5-year span, kudos to you, Keith. Keep up the good work. And I've also had an opportunity to have conversations with Keith at READ Detroit events in the past. READ stands for the Real Estate Association of Developers. And this is an organization that really puts in front of you multiple resources and different opportunities for you to interact with other developers and investors throughout the city of Detroit on a consistent basis. So if you're in and around Detroit, look up READ Detroit and you can thank me later. But Keith said something very important that we want to really highlight, double click on, and unpack a little bit, right? He said that you have to have money to do work first and then you get reimbursed, right? That one sentence explains an enormous amount about real estate development, especially here in the city of Detroit. Most people imagine construction financing working like this. The bank approves a $100,000 construction loan. The investor slash developer receives that $100,000. The developer builds the project. Not exactly, right? Construction loans are generally funded through something called a draw process. And understanding construction draws will completely change the way you think about development financing. Let's say you're renovating a building or a house. Your contractor completes $50,000 worth of work, framing, electrical, plumbing, whatever that particular phase requires. Somebody then submits documentation to the lender showing what work has been completed. The lender may send an inspector to the property. The inspector verifies the work. The lender processes the draw, and eventually money gets released. Now, notice the word I just used, eventually, right? Meanwhile, your contractor has employees. Your electrician has employees. Your plumber has employees, right? They need materials. They need payroll. They need fuel. They need insurance. Nobody wants to hear, don't worry, guys, the bank inspector should be here next Thursday, right? That doesn't make payroll. So somebody has to float that money, and frequently it's the developer. But there's actually a reason why construction lenders operate this way, right? Think about the lender's perspective. They don't want to give somebody $100,000 and simply hope that the home or building is renovated 6 months later, right? The lender wants its money tied to actual progress. So construction financing is designed around risk management. Money follows completed work. And from the lender's perspective, that's perfectly rational. But here's where things can get complicated, right? A system designed to protect the lender can create an enormous liquidity problem for the borrower. And liquidity simply means how much usable cash do you actually have available right now? You could be wealthy on paper and be broke on Tuesday, right? Developers know exactly what I'm talking about. You might own 3 buildings worth $3 million, right? Congratulations. Your plumber still wants his $18,000. Your net worth doesn't pay today's invoice. Cash does. And this distinction between wealth and liquidity is one of the most important concepts in real estate development.
To help developers like Buford, the organization Black Leaders Detroit has launched a building fund.
There are Detroiters that have been here and kept the lights on, and they want to benefit, right, from the turnaround. And there's just not enough tools to put them in the game.
Dewan Dandridge, the CEO of the nonprofit, says the fund is for developers of African descent, providing them with no-interest loans of up to $150,000 and even training so they can turn vacant buildings into thriving homes in Detroit neighborhoods.
From there, we do a few things to kind of make it accessible and friendly for the borrower. One of the things we do is we provide a third of the loan at closing.
During the program's first round, around $1.8 million was committed to 15 projects. Dandridge says the second round would distribute $800,000 to an additional 10 developments.
It means a lot to me, right? Because discussing the problems without creating solutions only perpetuate the problems.
And this is such an amazing initiative, right? Shout out to Dewan. I actually ran into Dewan at Good Cookies on McNichols between Evergreen and Southfield Road. Very tasty cookies, by the way. But I actually had a chance to meet Dewan in person probably, I would say, a month or so ago. And man, this guy is a very humble dude, right? He is running an organization that is changing the landscape of real estate development for small scale developers here in the city of Detroit. So I really do hope that this initiative continues to go through different funding rounds and provide different loans for developers that are looking to transform these neighborhoods that we're living in, right? Not just downtown, midtown. We're talking about real neighborhoods throughout the city of Detroit. But the important thing to highlight here isn't simply the loan opportunity of up to 150 grand, right? It's what the money can unlock. Imagine you've got a $300,000 redevelopment project. The senior lender might be perfectly comfortable financing most of it, but you're short about $75,000 in liquidity. That $75,000 gap can kill the entire project. So sometimes a relatively small amount of flexible capital can unlock a much larger amount of investment. That's called leverage. Not leverage simply meaning debt. I'm talking about catalytic leverage. $1 makes another $4 or $5 possible. And that's why intelligently designed development funds can have impacts far beyond the amounts of money they initially deploy. If $150,000 allows a developer to activate a $500,000 project, you're not simply financing $150,000 worth of development. You're helping unlock $500,000 worth of activity. Contractors get paid, materials get purchased, a vacant property gets occupied, right? Property values may start to stabilize. The city eventually receives additional tax revenue. A family gets housing, right? And neighboring property owners gain another occupied building on their block. That's how development multiplies through a local economy. Now, I'm going to slow down a little bit because whenever we talk about programs like this, it's easy to say, great program, give developers more money, more money, more money, and we'll take it for sure, right? But that's not enough. Capital without competency can become a disaster. Real estate development is not simply buy building, fix building, profit, right? You need construction management, budgeting, accounting, property management, insurance, legal knowledge, market analysis, financing knowledge, contractor management, and perhaps most importantly, the ability to know when not to do a deal, right? So the training component mentioned in this story may actually be just as important as the financing, maybe even more important, because $150,000 can help somebody complete a good deal, no doubt about it. But $150,000 can also help somebody lose $150,000 faster. Money doesn't fix a bad deal, it accelerates it. When neighborhoods begin appreciating after decades of disinvestment, the question then becomes, who participates in that appreciation, right? People understandably focus on homeowners, but developers matter too. Contractors matter, small businesses matter, property managers matter, architects matter, tradespeople matter, right? Neighborhood redevelopment creates an entire economy. If local residents participate only as renters or consumers, while ownership, construction profits, and appreciation flow somewhere else, then you're leaving a massive portion of neighborhood wealth creation on the table. But there's another side to this, right? Because being local does not automatically make somebody a good developer. And being an outside investor doesn't automatically make somebody bad. We need to make sure we get beyond these simplistic categories, right? The better questions are they maintaining the property? Are they completing projects? Are they treating tenants properly? Are they paying contractors? Are they creating quality housing? And are they contributing to neighborhood stability, right? That's how I prefer to evaluate development, by outcomes. Now, there's another issue that this news story doesn't really get into, which is appraisals, right? This has historically been a major obstacle in recovering neighborhoods. Imagine renovating a house for $160,000. Your lender asks, well, what is the property going to be worth when you're finished? And you say $220,000. The appraiser looks around and sees nearby sales at $150,000. Now you've got a problem, right? Because banks generally lend based partly on the collateral value. The neighborhood might be improving rapidly. Your project might be beautiful, right? But financing still depends heavily on what comparable properties recently sold for, right? This is one reason neighborhood recovery can happen slowly. The first developers into a distressed market are sometimes fighting yesterday's comparable sales while betting on tomorrow's neighborhood. That's real risk. And it's another reason patient or flexible capital can matter. Now, here's the challenge, right? The first round committed to 15 projects. The next round, another 10 developments, and that is extremely meaningful, right? That's 25 projects that potentially would have never happened if it weren't for this fund. But Detroit is a city of roughly 140 square miles, and so the scale of vacancy and disinvestment is enormous. So programs like this can't be the entire solution. They have to become part of a larger ecosystem. Banks, CDFIs, philanthropy, city government, state government, federal programs, private investors, contractors, neighborhood organizations, developers. Everybody has a role. The smartest development systems aren't dependent on one magical funding source. They create layers of capital that solve different problems.
And Buford described what the funding means to him in simple words.
It's been a game changer.
Now, if you're watching this because you're trying to become a developer, understand something. Your biggest challenge might not be finding a property. Detroit has properties. Your biggest challenge might not even be getting a loan approved. Your biggest challenge might be managing cash flow between every stage of the project. That's why you need contingencies. That's why you need reserves. That's why you'll need realistic construction budgets, right? That's why you need trustworthy contractors. That's why you'll need relationships with lenders. And that's why you should never confuse I got approved for financing with I have enough money to finish my project. Those are very different sentences. So Detroit has spent decades talking about vacancy, talking about abandonment, talking about neighborhood disinvestment, talking about inequitable access to capital. But eventually somebody has to renovate the building. Somebody has to sign the construction contract. Somebody has to borrow the money. Somebody has to guarantee the loan. Somebody has to manage the contractor. Somebody has to take on that risk. And somebody has to make sure the project survives long enough to become part of the neighborhood again. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from this story, it's this: development isn't simply about having money. It's about having the right money available at the right time under terms that allow the project to survive. That distinction sounds small, but trust me, it's not. It could determine whether a vacant house sits empty for another decade or becomes somebody's home, not house, but home. And when you multiply that decision across hundreds, if not thousands of properties, you no longer are talking about one real estate deal. You're talking about the future of a city. So I'm curious to know what you guys think. Should cities and philanthropic organizations put more money into financing small scale developers, or should traditional banks be doing more to create construction products that don't require developers to carry so much cash up front? And here's the harder question: if public or philanthropic money helps somebody become a successful developer, what should success actually look like 5 years later? Is it houses renovated, loans repaid, wealth created, neighborhood stability, or is it all of the above? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Thanks for listening to me ramble. See you in the next video.